I am Erica Pulley-Hayes, President and CEO of WMFE 90.7 and 89.7 WMFE. WMFE is also now part of the Florida Climate Reporting Network, a multi-newsroom initiative that includes the Miami Herald, the South Florida Sun-Sentinel, the Palm Beach Post, the Orlando Sentinel, WLRN Public Media, and the Tampa Bay Times. Amy's first story came out last week and focused on the city of Orlando's promise to achieve 100% clean energy by the year 2050. A print version of that story was in this past Monday's Orlando Sentinel. I'd like to ask that you consider a gift of support for WMFE. We are only able to do our reporting and hold these events from the support of our listeners and audiences. 2020 will demand a balanced, fast-paced, in-depth journalism coverage more than ever before. Your support for the work in Central Florida and beyond by becoming a member at www.wmfe.org. Another way to provide support is by purchasing tickets to Capitol Steps. That is the DC-based comedy troupe that's made up of former Senate staffers. That show will be held on March 12th. They're coming back to Orlando. They've been here before. You may have seen them. And they will be at the Trinity Prep in Winter Park. And there are only a few tickets left, and they can be purchased at www.wmfe.org. And now I'll turn it over to Matthew Peddie, who is host of our show Intersection, and he will take you through a conversation with our panelists and engage in a little Q&A.
Thank you all for joining us for this live taping of Intersection at the Orlando Public Library's Melrose Center. I'm Matthew Peddie. February marks 1 year since the death of Transportation Security Administration Officer Robert Henry at the Orlando International Airport. And in the aftermath of Rob Henry's suicide, questions were raised, including about the workplace culture at TSA. An investigation by WMFE's Abe Aboraya and Danielle Prieur uncovered allegations of abuse and retaliation at TSA and followed up on some of the changes in culture that Rob's death has prompted at TSA. So today we're going to take a look back at the last 12 months and ask what's changed and what comes next. First, we'll hear from a panel of journalists who covered the story, and then we'll talk to some of Rob's friends and colleagues, and there will be some time for questions as well. On stage with me, Danielle Prieur. She's a reporter with WMFE. Thank you, Danielle. Also joined by Abe Aboraya, health reporter with WMFE. Thanks, Abe.
Thank you.
Asher Wildman is a reporter with Spectrum News 13. Thank you, Asher. And Isaac Babcock, journalist and photographer. Isaac, thank you as well. I want to start with you, Danielle, and just walk us back through the events of that day back in February last year.
When I first got to the airport, it was a little chaotic. People weren't sure what had happened. It sounded like maybe a gun or some sort of weapon had gone off, so they rushed through the gates. And it wasn't until I think people looked around that they realized that somebody had jumped. And so I think people were just kind of in shock, passengers, but also TSA workers. And it was just a very emotional, I spent probably 5 or 6 hours there talking to people after it happened. And people responded in different ways, but I saw some very touching things. At one point, there was a TSA worker who went and just sort of sat right kind of where the fountain is, where Rob would have actually fallen, and just kind of was looking through pictures of Rob on his Facebook page. And I don't know who that TSA worker was. I didn't ask because I didn't want to interrupt kind of his reflection and his moment. But yeah, it was just a very emotional thing, obviously, that a young man had taken his life during the government shutdown. Nobody really knew why, in the middle of a very, very busy day.
Right, and one of the busiest airports in the United States.
Yes.
You know, it's definitely busy in Florida. So, a very public event and very shocking, as you said. Asher, in the follow-up to Rob's death, you did some work and reporting and broke the story essentially about the allegations of bullying. Just kind of walk us through that.
When everything happened,
I was trying to find, being from Central Florida, I was trying to find somebody who might know somebody within TSA, and I was trying to figure out what exactly had happened. You know, we were told that day that the belief was Robert Henry had jumped because he had a toothache and that he was suffering from depression from not getting his paycheck because at the time the government was on this government shutdown. I literally connected with a former high school friend who then connected me to somebody else who then said I had to find a woman by the name of Felisa. And that wasn't even the right name, it wasn't the right spelling, so I couldn't even figure out who this person was. I went to the airport the next day to try to ask around as to who is this Felisa was the name I had, and it was spelt like PH. It was totally not right. But finally, I think I finally got a hold of somebody at the Starbucks that's right there off the terminal, and they gave me the name of Brenda Shearer. And they said, you need to find Brenda Shearer. And I did the best I could. I looked her up on the white pages. She was unlisted. I went to her address. In fact, the first time I went to her house, I left a note and a business card on her front door just saying, can I connect with you? And then I think I waited 2 to 3 days, and I came back to her property, and she happened to be home. And that's when I found out, talking to Brenda, a little bit more about Robert, who was living with her. She in a way was kind of his secondary mother, if you will. You could tell that there was a very deep relationship there between Robert and Brenda. And when I learned more about Robert and his life, it just didn't add up that a guy with a toothache would take his life. So once I hooked up with Brenda, I eventually was able to find Felicita, was her correct name when I finally figured out who Felisa was, or Felisa. And then from there, it just kind of was like a spider web, if you will, of just spreading out of other people trying to talk and come forward. But without Brenda kind of having that conversation with her about who Robert was and kind of what his life was like, I would have never pursued more to figure out what was really going on.
Was it immediately evident to you as you started that first day of reporting that this story went that deep?
I really think so. I mean, Brenda told me that Robert lived in this side house adjacent to her property. His car was paid off. His bills at the time was, I think he had to contribute to the internet bill, and he had to pay his electric bill, but he was rent-free otherwise. And a lot of it wasn't making sense that he had a good relationship with her children. He played video games with them. She would drop them off at the theme parks. It did not sound like he had monetary problems. So when I was putting this all together with Brenda, I just figured out that there's something more here. I mean, it just doesn't make sense that the guy that has this great at-home lifestyle with the Shearers and is living rent-free, the fact that there was a government shutdown, he didn't need the money, his car was fully paid off, and the toothache, I think my conversation with Brenda was that, yeah, it kind of bugged him, but it wasn't anything that was like really concerning to her.
Mm-hmm. Abe, kind of flash forward a couple of months, and we're reporting a story on WMFE, and then we start getting calls and people literally walking into the station saying, hey, I've got more to tell. Walk us through that.
Yeah, we literally had people who came to the station to say, like, hey, listen, there's a lot going on at Orlando International Airport that isn't being, the full story isn't being told. And we kind of took the approach that once we started getting a lot of these, having these contacts with people and getting some of the documents and doing initial interviews, that we had the thought that it might be a good idea to have a way for TSA agents to contact us. So that's when we built out the survey to give people a way to reach out to us and connect with us that way. And we did get TSA agents predominantly, and they were from across the country. It was pretty surprising. It wasn't a huge number, but it was a surprising amount when you consider how much depth a lot of the people were willing to give us, and some people were uploading documents, and we were able to, through that, find people who in other parts of the country had also had issues where they had attempted suicide and basically said that the working conditions at TSA were a huge factor in that, and so it kind of lent a lot more credibility to the idea that it's this isn't just something that this isn't just something that was happening at TSA in Orlando, that there's something a bit broader going on within an organization that's extremely large and has a very important mission to keep everyone safe when they're flying.
What's that process like of kind of getting information via a survey? That seems a little counterintuitive for a journalist in some ways.
It's surprising how we did this a little bit when I was working with ProPublica in 2018, where we were reaching out to first responders, mostly police officers, firefighters, EMTs that were dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, or that also had, lost people to suicide that were family members and, thought the PTSD was a contributing factor. So kind of working through that, I didn't expect us to get a lot of traction when we started on that project, and we did. It was actually, we got hundreds of people who were willing to come forward and talk with us. So it's kind of counterintuitive that people are willing to talk about something that can be so intensely personal. But really, the survey is just a way to contact people. It's just a way to get someone to say, yeah, I would like to talk with you, and have that connection. And then it's from there. It's just sort of the standard reporting where you're reaching out, talking to people, getting them on the record if you can, and going through documents. And it's really just a way to connect with people. And I've been pleasantly surprised how many people are willing to do that.
Mm-hmm. Danielle, are you surprised by some of the responses that you got and some of the depth of stories that people were willing to share through the surveys and through your conversations?
I actually wasn't, because I think kind of like Rob's death, it's a cry for help. And when you've hit this point of desperation and you have no other way out, I think you're willing to tell your story. The stakes are higher, right? When you're willing to do what Rob did or what other TSA workers have done in other various ways. So I've learned that TSA workers are like a big family. And so once we spoke with one, they started to kind of talk to each other, and they all kind of opened up to us, which we're very, very grateful for their honesty and sharing their stories with us.
Mm-hmm. Isaac, I want to bring you into this conversation. You spent some time taking portraits of TSA officers, and there's more to it than just pointing your camera and taking that photo, right?
Right.
And I know we have some photos we're going to be able to show as well up on the screen too.
We do have a slideshow.
Yeah, so if you could just sort of talk us through that process. How did you get interview subjects to open up and get the photo that you needed?
Well, there is some irony with what Abe and Danielle have spoken about so far, people being willing to come forward, because once you're in that situation where you're talking to them about very personal subjects, you need them to be comfortable, you need them to open up. This is something that they have had to either escape or they're still fighting it now. And say, for example, with Dave Platt, who's up there with his dog Tippy, and I believe that he named his dog Tippy because he has boats, he loves going fishing, and maybe that dog doesn't have its sea legs yet, but that dog helped him open up, because everything else up until we were talking about his dog and what he does to escape mentally from what he was doing, it was short sentences. It was very brief. It was like he was keeping himself locked down. Once he could talk about what he did to escape from this, that's when we started to really see him as a person instead of somebody that's trying to escape from what he's had to deal with the TSA. You talk about Abe with the PTSD, with EMTs, firefighters, paramedics, and that's the kind of thing that it seems like that he's dealing with now. Dave was a bomb tech in the military, and so this is a guy that's used to very high-stress situations. Like if you've ever seen The Hurt Locker, that kind of a situation where the tension involved in it, and yet this got to him. The stress from the TSA got to him. So that tells you something about his situation. But Joe Donadio, who will be on the next panel, I believe, he's somebody that has physically escaped this. TSA, it was so tough for him, he developed an anxiety disorder while he was working there. TSA, he said, made it worse. He got into a physical altercation at one point with his boss, and everything seemed to spiral downhill from there. This is his place out in near Ocala, Marion County. He's in Marion County as a firefighter now. That's his new job. And it's an irony about what you were talking about, Abe, that the first responders that have PTSD, this is what he does so that he won't have PTSD as he's a first responder now. He's escaping the TSA physically, mentally, but he's looking out on the lake, and this is where he goes every time he comes home. He just sits there and he thinks. And you could tell he's very comfortable with being there. And
I find it interesting that you're kind of trying to find somebody in their sort of quiet place, in their moment of zen, so
Right.
to speak, right?
Right.
To get that photograph.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's, well, Joe, thankfully, he was the most open to me right away. He's a warm, welcoming guy. He'll come out and shake your hand and your friends immediately.
Yeah.
But maybe it helped that he's here with his girlfriend Vanessa. They're building a life out there on this lake. They have chickens. They have birds that come and visit them at their chain link fence. It's fantastic. But when we got to go over to the fire station where Joe showed me where he's a firefighter, it's like I got a whole different Joe. And you get to see who he is now, and he's really proud of himself. And this is something, of course, needless to say, he should be proud of. He's helping to save people. But he was doing that at the TSA. But maybe the TSA wasn't having his back, and he needed a place that did. And that's what firefighting is for him now. So that's the whole new Joe. And I think he's proud of himself. And not that he wasn't proud of himself there. But, yeah, you could tell that he was a different person when he was talking to me when he was there.
Mm-hmm.
But moving on to Sean San Roman, this is a guy that didn't feel like he was trying to get away from it mentally or physically. This is a guy that's in the fight. And he's somebody that saw the problems. He actually blames himself a little bit for them because it's a cultural issue. It's not something that necessarily just comes from above, though he was pretty high up there. I believe he was the number 3 there for his position. And he's a guy that you don't mess with. You could tell that when you're talking to him, but that is also a warm, welcoming, big father family figure. And he's still fighting the good fight. He works at the TSA at Sanford International Airport now, the Orlando Sanford International. And my favorite photo of him was this, because look at all the boxes that are surrounding him. This is stuff that was out on the table when I got there. This is not something that we put together for a photo. That's all the research on everything that he's done to try and solve this problem. Every incident that he saw, all of this is on the table literally, and his hands are literally in deep in this. He's still fighting it, trying to help from within. Mm-hmm. And so he impressed me with that. And yeah, he was the kind of guy that you don't want to go up against, so maybe he'll make a change with TSA over time. We'll see.
Now, you also spent some time at the airport taking kind
Yes.
of photographs for our website and for the series. Just kind of talk through what it's like experiencing that, because you've traveled through MCO many times, as I'm sure many of us have, but it's different when you're behind a camera or you've got a notebook in hand and you're kind of looking at it as a reporter versus a tourist or a traveler.
Right. Yeah, I fly at least a few times a year, and I always talk about how great Orlando International is. It's one of my favorite airports. It's actually, if you go to a bunch of other ones, you know how good Orlando is, and you don't know who to be thankful for, because the TSA, it's always that one extra barrier that you're walking through. Oh no, it's slowing me down getting to my plane on time. But when I walked in there, I guess it was just a matter of circumstance. I don't know where to park there. There's too many garages, but I walk in there and I realize I'm in the atrium where Robert Henry had committed suicide, and I'm seeing it a different way for the first time. That was interesting to me. The water fountain is flowing away, and many cultures, water, it has certain special meaning. Mm-hmm. And I went up to the 10th floor. I saw exactly where he had jumped from. And as Daniel had mentioned earlier when we were talking about it, there's a plant there now. That's about all that's changed of that hotel, is at the 10th floor there's a plant there where Robert Henry jumped. And so you walk in there and you get a different feeling for this place. And you realize the stress that these people are going through, and you hope that you see more smiles on faces as they're going up these long lines to get to that TSA agent. The first TSA agent that I saw, I'd mentioned this before, is a very pregnant woman, and she's walking up to her shift. And she sits down and she's got a smile on her face. And what she's going through in the background, what she's going through possibly with her bosses, and still having a smile on her face to do this job, that says a lot about what these people are going through and what they're still going through, that they have to be that strong. Very pregnant, working, smiling with this giant line in front of her, not knowing if right behind her people have her back.
Asher, I want to bring you back into this conversation, just kind of thinking about being a visual journalist and thinking about the visual elements of a story too. I mean, you clearly kind of, you're after the story. You're reaching out to contacts, you're kind of following up on leads, but How much time do you have to spend sort of thinking about the way a story's going to look?
Yeah, when I started this journey, if you will, I really didn't know what was going to happen. I had no idea. It probably, after my initial conversation with Brenda, and then I started talking to people, I've told my news director that there's something here, that there's people that want to talk. And the best analogy I can give is I felt like Aaron Brockovich. I'm being serious. I probably spoke to about 73 people, and only about 5 were willing to come on camera, come on the record. And I was really surprised over the weeks of how many people would call me that just wanted to just talk.
Mm-hmm. But not on record.
But not on record, right. So, and that was a very fine line. But, the people that I finally was able to connect with, I mean, I can tell you, like, I wish I could snap, but I can't. I can tell you visually and memorize everything that happened. I mean, I remember meeting Joseph at the lake, and I can remember his voice when he said, I told him, get my hands off me. Get your hands off me, because that's kind of his voice. And I mean, there's just those little things like I remember. And with Brenda, I remember the first time she's like, come out here in my house. Look, it's a beautiful day out here. And it's just, you connect with people. And
we're going to be checking whether your impersonation's good.
Yeah,
in the second panel.
But I just, it's one of those things that when I was spending time with these people, it wasn't just a 5-minute Q&A. Like, I really tried to get to know these people, and I worked on this for, 2 to 3 months. And finally, after I got enough interviews done, it was just a matter of getting to the airport, getting some video. But most of the stories that I tried to focus on were of the people of the story, because they were the ones that was the story. I mean, it was Brenda talking about Robert. It was Joseph talking about what happened to him. It was Felicita who witnessed it. It was Sean and David who are still in their lawsuits right now. So I really made an effort to know that they could call me, even if they just wanted to find out what the football score was on Sunday. I mean, David Platt, for those of you who don't know, he's a hooligan. I mean, he's a great guy. He's a comic. But I just feel like those are the kind of things that really made the story so good, is that the people were comfortable enough to for one, to take a stand and come forward, and two, to have that comfort with me to know that they could be open and discuss these things.
Mm-hmm. Because when you're sitting watching the evening news, you see like a story for a minute and a half or something. You don't see everything that goes on behind the scenes, the months of work that goes into that story.
I give my editor a lot of credit. I really had no idea visually how it was going to be. I mean, trying to get photos of Robert Henry was a little challenge, just because Robert's mom was very, she was hesitant. Mm-hmm. She was very hesitant at first. But then when we got documents and you're starting to piece it all together, you just don't want to show 9 minutes of documents across the screen, because then that's really boring. So I really did try to focus on the individuals and kind of let them, because it's their story to tell. I'm just kind of like, I wish I had a Morgan Freeman voice narrating it, but I don't. So I just let them tell their story.
It sounds like, from Isaac's description of going through that process of spending time with the folks in the story, taking portraits, it's kind of changed your impression of what the work that TSA agents do, Isaac, and I guess your appreciation for travel. I want to sort of put that question to you too, Asher. Is this story over the last 12 months sort of changed the way you approach travel as an individual?
I'm afraid to go through TSA after this. I'm just being serious. There's a lot of people out there that I know are not happy with me. I go to the food court, and in fact, anytime I'm assigned a story at the airport, I go to the food court, because there's about 50 of them on break every 15 minutes, and I hand out my card like a used car salesman, and I just say, hey, do you want to talk? And so many times, I'm telling you, 99.9%, they take their card, they take my card, they throw it away, because there is still that. They don't want to be seen with the media. There's still that fear of, I really believe, that fear of retaliation if they do get caught talking to the media. But I can tell you, I definitely get a couple weird looks when I go to the airport. And, I think, I hope that what we did wasn't in vain, because I really hope we did bring to light what was happening over there. But at the same time, I can tell you that when I try to talk to even more people, that there's still just a fine line of, no, we're not going to go there.
Mm-hmm. Abe, what about you? Do you travel differently now?
I definitely, both times that we've had stories come out in recent times, I've had to go through MCO as a traveler, and both times I've kind of handed my ID, and they look down and kind of give you a funny look, and you never know, like, if it's like, I'm not going to say anything, I don't want to kind of jinx it, but Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like, you know, it definitely changed my perspective of it there, you know, in part because we, you know, when you're there and you're going through and you look over and the atrium's right there and you're like, God, it's just in your face. Like, it's so close to what, you know, the TSA agents are working through. It's like a constant reminder that something like that happened, that, you know, it was an event for most people that maybe they saw it on the news or had some kind of blip with it, or maybe they were traveling and had some inconvenience from it. But for those people that work there, I mean, that's just like a constant reminder. So that's definitely something that, you know, I think about when I go through. And, you know, Asher, to your point about, you know, hopefully some of the stuff not being in vain, you know, TSA did, you know, have this contract coming out for suicide prevention training, and I think it was like a $25,000 contract roughly. So, you know, at least there's something that's moving, and they did credit, you know, the reporting, saying that we didn't realize how bad some of the problems were. So, you know, kind of knock on wood.
But in the report, they said there's no bullying.
No, yeah, there was no evidence.
No evidence of bullying.
Yeah, but you know, it did show that this was a national problem. So it's something that what was the terminology? It was going to be a national goal, a national focus for them coming through. So, anyhow.
Danielle, how has this story kind of changed your approach to travel and kind of the thoughts that go through your head when you see what those agents are doing, you know, if you happen to be at the airport?
I see them now almost as family and as friends. I've gotten to know so many of them, and they've shared so much of their lives with me. For me, I pass where Robert died every single time I go back and forth home to Detroit. So it intersects with my personal life at that point. It's not just my professional life. And I think for me, that's the impact, is it's impacted me on a personal level. When he died that day, I thought it was so sad that I missed him, that I never got to know who he was, that I'm never going to get to meet him. And so in a way, this was my only way of getting to know who he was. And I think with suicide, so often we don't care about the person. We just say this person is suicide. We don't think the person's a person. We can't think that the person was ever happy or had friends or had a life or had dreams or anything like that. And I thought we owed Robert that. And we owe everybody who dies in that way that peace of mind for their family as well.
Mm-hmm. Abe, to your point earlier about the fact that TSA agents, TSOs, they're working, you know, at MCO, and they would have to sort of think about this every day. I mean, you've done quite a bit of work with around PTSD and first responders, and so you know the kind of the risk of having somebody in that situation without the help that they might need.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely going to be, obviously it's going to be different for every person and that's working through it, but you know, I think that that's one of the things that's different for, you know, for a lot of people that I talked to that were firefighters or EMTs. You know, you drive by an intersection and you remember a call, or you drive by an area, but you know, that, again, that's kind of what struck me about this, was that this was where you work, and so it's every day that you're there. So I think that's, you know, having some conversations with a few of the TSOs, that it does sound like it is difficult to deal with, and they're dealing with it in different ways individually, but I can definitely see how that would be extremely difficult. You know, if you had to, you know, your 8-hour day or 12-hour day is always going to be, you know, having that reminder in your face.
The one thing a lot of people got to remember, because I think years from now you're going to forget, is that this happened during a government shutdown. That when in fact, I asked TSA, and I asked, I believe I even asked Debbie Hanner, the union president, I said, what about grief counselors? Grief counselors? This is a government shutdown. I mean, these people aren't even getting paid. So they didn't even have the opportunity to have somebody to talk to after this had happened. And on top of that, you have a lot of disgruntled and frustrated workers right now that have not been able to take time off, that are working extra hours for people who aren't showing up. So when this all happened, it could not have happened at a worse time for everybody at TSA to just impact them even harder than it already was when this happened. I mean, there was just way too many things happening, even for everybody that was there, their whole personal lives. There's a lot going on for everybody, and they had nobody to talk to, or at least the opportunity to.
Mm-hmm. And think about it this way, too. I mean, even if you had no personal connection to Robert and you didn't know him, or you were maybe even just a person who was flying through that airport, you know, when the sound of that was so loud that, the 911 calls were from TSA agents saying a bomb went off. Like, people who are, going through, have been trained in this stuff, mistook it for a bomb. And the panic that happened out of that, it was obviously a traumatic situation for everyone involved, even if putting aside, Robert Henry and what was going on with the culture at TSA, just, seeing and being there in that impact where you think, oh God, it's happening here, that in and of itself was going to be, tough to deal with.
Abe, you alluded to the contract for training to educate officers. I want to sort of pick up on that and maybe flip that question to you as well, Danielle. What else is new? Where is the story at now? Or Abe, if you want to pick that one up.
Well, the one thing that did happen today, there was a committee in the House that passed a bill that would, through committee, so obviously it still has to go through the full House of Representatives, but, and I'm not sure if there's a Senate companion. I haven't done the research on that yet, but, this was a bill to give transportation security officers the similar protections as other federal workers. And, it's just on the way of background, that was something that I didn't know about TSA. It got put together so rapidly after September 11th that, they basically exempted those transportation security officers. They gave the TSA, people who were putting it together the leeway to basically hire and fire, more at will than a traditional federal employee. And I think, having had all these conversations with people that are going through issues with TSA, you see a lot of equal employment opportunity, complaints and things like that. And I think if you were to see, them have the ability to say, well, this job transfer was retaliation, I want to be able to, appeal that to an independent board. Some of those protections, bringing those in, it might actually help change some of the culture where it's not going to be, quite so apparent where, you have, there's no recourse other than to file a federal, EEOC complaint or something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that Stan Tucholsky can tell us a little bit more about this in the next panel, but there's been some things even at MCO. I said Stan's name and the mic went out. Wow, powerful. But they have ribbons now to kind of commemorate Rob's death, but also to talk about suicide prevention, to get people talking about the symptoms of that and where to get help, and to kind of attack the stigma around suicide and mental health that's very much a part of the agency.
Mm-hmm. Asher, I know stories like this you don't just report the story and then that's it, right? I mean, we're 12 months out almost, but you are still working this story, right? And broad strokes,
yeah,
there's some things that you're going to be reporting in the next sort of week or so.
Tune in next week to News Channel 13. I have a couple of things, but one thing I can say here tonight is that the 2019 Federal Employment Survey for Work Satisfaction came out. This is a survey done by all federal government agencies and employees. There were 420 government agencies that are out there, and do you guys have any idea where TSA ranks out of 420?
I would go 420.
You're very close, 398th. So 398 out of 420 is where, they rank. And I think that speaks volumes of what the culture is like. And I mean, there's some agencies I've never heard of. Quite frankly, there's some agencies I don't have an interest in ever working in. I think there was one that's another time. But the point is that out of 420, the TSA was 398. And MCO was actually also near the bottom of all international airports across the country. And I think their approval rating was something like 40%. Which was actually a decrease from the year before. So it's, I want to sit here and tell everybody things are getting better, but the employees are saying otherwise.
Mm-hmm. And it's been a bit of a learning curve, I'm sure, kind of learning about TSA, right? Because this is an agency which was formed not actually that long ago in the scheme of federal agencies. Abe, have you learned some surprising things about the way this agency operates?
Like I said, I had no idea, how the agency sort of came to be. I think there's definitely a lot of surprises when it comes to, and maybe I'm guilty of this because when you think of TSA, I think 2 years ago, if you'd asked me, it's sort of the cliched late night comedy host, butt of the joke, they took away my bottle of water kind of a thing, and it just sort of struck me that, how many of these people are going through things that, they're getting it from all ends. They're dealing with a flying public that, for the most part, probably is not super thrilled and super happy with them. And then on the same time, they've got all the things that are going on in the background that, if you're a TSA agent working in a line, you kind of have to put on that public face and do the Disney thing and smile and wave, and despite whatever's going on. So.
I mean, the thing that to me was the most alarming, and you say, what did we learn about TSA? I learned it's a high school culture, and what do I mean by that? That a guy is going to get ridiculed for taking his phone out, and he's going to get punished. He's going to get sent to the Green Mile. He's going to get sent to an area where they're going to try to get him to fall asleep, so once again, they can penalize him again. I mean, that, and it wasn't just Robert Henry. I mean, this has been going on for dozens of TSA employees, and at the same time, now, as a reporter/traveler, you are going through a gate thinking to yourself, these are the people that I'm putting my national security in the hands of. Somebody that takes joy out of, quite frankly, high school bullying, a guy that's trying to protect United States of America travel, hell, the whole nation, the whole world travelers. But this is the mentality of what's happening at this airport. Can you imagine what's happening at every other airport? And I think that's why, for me, I was kind of, I don't want to say annoyed, but just kind of dissatisfied in that if this is what's happening with people that I'm putting my trust into going through security, and like you said, the butt of the joke, the water bottle. But if these are the same people that are going to take away my water bottle, in the back of my mind, I'm saying these are the same people that want to just absolutely humiliate one of their fellow colleagues, and whether it's putting them on the front stage of the Green Mile, whether it's trying to get them someplace to fail, and they do it over and over and over again, it really did change my mind about how these people operate. It did.
And one of the things, too, that, they do all these, you talked about the surveys with Orlando International Airport, ranking low. That's kind of an oddball, because typically with the TSA, when they do the surveys of the airports, it's the smaller airports that have these really, bad satisfaction scores for the employees, which makes sense because, it's a smaller number of employees. You have a few bad apples in a smaller pond, I mix my metaphors, but you know what I'm saying? Like, you have, it's easier to have things go bad when there's fewer people, but for some reason, Orlando International Airport, even though it's a large airport and has all these employees, it still has these issues, and it comes across like a smaller airport, a smaller, more rural one. It's odd.
I think it also spoke volume that when after everything had come out and the stories had been broken, that, the Federal Security Director, Jerry Henderson, was put on administrative leave. So I think, in fact, I spoke to Congressman Soto about this, and he said TSA may not admit that things were happening, but they showed things were happening. And you don't just remove your Federal Security Director because low morale. I mean, something's happening. Right. So I think deep down TSA is aware, but this is such a cultural problem that it starts from the top down, and unless you're going to absolutely clean house, I think that's what TSA is trying to figure out, is how do we rectify this and how do we clean it without getting rid of everybody?
And it's a federal bureaucracy too, so change is going to take some time. It's not a tiny ship.
I'm on an HOA, I know what you mean.
Around.
But it's like Sean San Roman mentioned when I was talking to him. He's in the middle of this, but pretty high up, and he realized that he was part of the problem. He wasn't one of those people that's just saying, oh, it's somebody else doing it to me. He saw it up and down throughout the structure. It wasn't just from the top down.
What questions, Isaac, do you still have about TSA after your involvement in this reporting project?
Well, I want to know what they can do to make these people feel like they have their back immediately, like there's a process moving forward. Because imagine being in that well that they're in right now where they don't know if they're going to come out. I'd like to know if somebody's going to show them there's real progress because, well, we spoke with Darren Soto a couple of weeks ago, and he was very matter-of-fact about what has to happen in Congress, what he wants to see happen, but some of that stuff we don't know if it's going to happen. A lot of that stuff we don't know if it's going to happen, and those are the kind of things that a TSA worker is going to work every day thinking about. It's something we might think about every once in a while. Every day these people are thinking about, is this going to get better?
Well, and also, to add to that, not everybody's part of the union, and there is a union president here locally. And I can just tell you, I'll say it on your show, that I've spoken to numerous people that don't trust their union president or their union, and that's a shame. And I even brought this up with the congressman. I'll give you a perfect example. Robert Henry's files. I've asked for them. I've been told for a year now by the union president that they're somewhere in a file cabinet. Where 1 year later, I still don't have those files. And this is from the union president. And when I spoke to her on the phone this week, she said to me that she believes that anything that's over a year would get thrown out. Now, how thick do you think Robert Henry's file is that would have been thrown out? I'm sorry, but it's the truth. There are people at TSA that cannot trust their union president, and when you're told something like that, that is a red flag. When I try to interview people and I ask them, why won't you come forward, their answer to me is, we're afraid we're going to lose our job. We're afraid we're going to get retaliated against. That is what the union is there for. It is to protect these people and to help them out. And if that many people are still afraid to come forward, that right there should tell you what you need to know.
So there's obviously more to the story. I do want to leave a little bit of time for questions if we have some, but just one final question for the panel. Is it a surprise, I guess, that TSA officers maybe don't have the kind of protections that they should as frontline federal agents? Danielle, what do you think?
I think so, and I mean, I know that Darren Soto's working on some legislation, which is what Abe had referenced, that would kind of give them the same protections of other federal workers, including back pay, if there's another very long government shutdown again. But yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of what Abe said. I think in a lot of ways, TSA workers are just the butt of a joke, even though they're the ones that keep us safe every single day. So yeah, I mean, it's very necessary to give them any sort of protections they need to be able to do their job 100% every single day.
Just a quick amendment. They are able to get back pay. It would be to get, paid because they have to attend to work. So it would be to
Right.
get them paid during a shutdown.
As it's happening.
Yep.
What do you think of that question, though, Abe? I mean, does it surprise you that they maybe don't sort of have that level of protection that maybe other agents at the federal government would have?
Yeah, frankly, it did. It's one of those situations where it's so kind of in the weeds, but it's so, it just surprises me that, people who are tasked as, protecting people who are flying are not given the same protections as, job protections as someone who is, working in a, the Environmental Protection Agency or something to that effect. Because it's surprising. So I'll leave it at that.
Asher?
I echo what Abe said there. As far as what the future could hold, though, is that kind of what you're looking for?
Yeah.
I would like to see. I think it starts at the local level. I really do. I think there needs to be accountability for local unions to stand up harder and firmer. And I'm not just trying to say Orlando here. I'm trying to say every TSA union across the United States of America. I think employees should be able to rely on their union to fight for them, to go to bat for them, and to know that there's a trust level there. As far as the things Congress is trying to do, they're getting a lot of hesitation from a certain branch of the government that doesn't really want to look into this very much. So I think Congress, and I know there's a lot, whether it's Demings, Murphy, Soto, they're all trying to do great things, but there's kind of I hate to use this metaphor, a wall that's blocking that progress from happening. And until we see that, I think a lot of people are going to be disappointed.
Mm-hmm. Isaac, where do you see this story going?
Well, I can only speak to my experience, but I wouldn't be surprised if, based on the TSA folks that I've spoken with personally, they're all fighters. We have one in this room, Joe Donadio, that I spoke with personally. They're fighting this as it goes on. Maybe we get some wins out of this. Maybe that emboldens more TSA agents to say, maybe I should start fighting for my ability to want to come to this job and not have to worry about things. Mm-hmm. And maybe that creates a movement that really starts to kick off some progress.
I want to thank our panelists. Just stay put for a minute if you would. Do we have questions from the audience? Anyone want to ask a question? I think there's a microphone over here if you want to wander over and put your question. And just introduce yourself before you.
Yeah, Luis Nieves, Winter Park. Thank you. Quick question. There's been, through the past couple of years, there's been a couple of projects coming out of Congress to privatize the TSA. Based on your experience, how much do you think maybe that has had an effect on the whole culture of the organization?
Who wants to take that?
I mean, the people that I've spoken with, it's definitely, you know, when you talk about the big overall stressors, privatization is definitely one of the ones that we didn't address as much in our reporting, but it's, you know, speaking with people, it's definitely something that's always in the back of their mind that, you know, at any given point, something might happen, a bill might get through, and then TSA is privatized, and, you know, you might have more and more people out of a job. So that, you know, it's one of those global stressors that I think is weighing on a lot of people. Frankly, from a, you know, where that comes from at a political level, I'm not sure where that stands right now. I haven't heard as much about it recently, but yeah, it's definitely something that's there all the time for people.
Well, thanks for your question. Any others? All right. Well, I want to thank the panel again, WMFE reporters Danielle Prieur and Abe Aboraya, and News 13 reporter Asher Wildman, and journalist and photographer Isaac Babcock. Round of applause. And stay with us. We'll be back with our second panel in just a few minutes.